I'll never forget the moment I walked into that bathroom and saw him standing there, water cascading down his sculpted body, steam rising around him like a sensual veil. My stepbrother. My eyes couldn't leave his naked form, and in that moment, I knew we would cross a line we could never return from. The bass pulsed through the crowded college house, vibrating beneath Emma's feet as she pressed herself against the wall, trying to disappear. The borrowed crimson dress clung to her curves like a second skin, the fabric whispering against her thighs with every subtle movement. Her fingers nervously traced the neckline that dipped lower than anything she'd ever worn before. What was I thinking coming here? She thought, scanning the room for her literature classmates who had abandoned her minutes after arrival. The heat of unfamiliar gazes crawled across her exposed skin, making her simultaneously powerful and vulnerable. A deep voice cut through the music near her ear, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. Lost among the commoners, princess? Emma turned, her breath catching as she recognized the tall figure beside her. Daniel, her father's new wife's son. Her stepbrother of barely 2 years. His blue eyes glittered with mischief in the dim party lights, his perpetually tousled dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that seemed both careless and deliberate. The familiar scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something uniquely him, enveloped her, inexplicably comforting in this chaotic environment. I'm not lost, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. And don't call me princess. Daniel's mouth curved into a half-smile that had made countless girls at his university fall at his feet. Emma had always prided herself on being immune. Tonight, though, something felt different. Maybe it was the dress. Maybe it was the 3 sips of cheap wine. Maybe it was the way his eyes lingered on her bare shoulders a moment too long. That dress. He let the sentence hang, his gaze traveling down her body and back up in a way that made her skin feel too tight. It's not what you usually wear. Emma fought the urge to cross her arms over her chest. Maybe you don't know what I usually wear. He leaned closer, his lips nearly brushing her ear. I know you better than you think, Emma. His breath was warm against her skin, carrying the faint scent of whiskey. Including the fact that you hate parties like this. A slight tremor ran through her body at his proximity. She was suddenly conscious of how little space separated them, how the dim corner they occupied created an artificial intimacy. Then why am I here? She challenged, turning her face slightly toward his. Their eyes locked, and for a heartbeat, something electric passed between them. Daniel's pupils dilated, the blue of his irises darkening to midnight. That, he said softly, is exactly what I'm wondering. Before she could respond, a group of boisterous partygoers stumbled near them, forcing Daniel to step even closer to avoid being jostled. His hand found her waist instinctively, steadying them both. Through the thin fabric of her dress, his touch burned like a brand. Sorry, he murmured, though he didn't move his hand. Emma knew she should step away. Instead, she found herself leaning slightly into his touch. It's fine. The pounding music seemed to fade into the background as they stood there, caught in a moment that stretched beyond normal time. Emma was acutely aware of his thumb making small, perhaps unconscious circles against her side. Want to get out of this corner? Daniel finally asked, his voice rougher than before. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He guided her through the crowd, his hand remaining protectively at her lower back. The simple touch sent currents of electricity up her spine with each step. They found a quieter spot near the makeshift bar, where Daniel grabbed 2 bottles of water. Figured you might need this more than another mystery punch. Emma accepted the water gratefully, their fingers brushing during the exchange. She took a long sip to cool her suddenly parched throat. So why are you really here, Daniel? She asked. This is a freshman party. Aren't you a bit overqualified? He laughed, the sound deep and genuine. Maybe I'm keeping an eye on my little stepsister. I don't need a babysitter, she retorted, feeling an unexpected sting at his words. Daniel's expression softened as he studied her face. No, he agreed quietly. You definitely don't. The way he said it made her stomach flip. For 2 years, they'd maintained a careful distance within their forced family arrangement, cordial but never close, always aware of the awkwardness of their situation. But tonight something had shifted. Dance with me, he said suddenly, the request surprising them both. Emma raised an eyebrow. You don't dance. I make exceptions. He held out his hand, an unspoken challenge in his eyes. She should have refused. Instead, she placed her palm against his and allowed him to lead her to the crowded dance floor. The DJ had shifted to something slower, the bass thrumming at a sensuous tempo that matched the beating of Emma's heart. Daniel pulled her closer than was strictly necessary, his hand finding the small of her back again. Her arms went around his neck almost of their own volition. They moved together with unexpected grace, their bodies finding a natural rhythm. Emma was intensely conscious of every point of contact between them, his hand at her back, another at her waist, her chest occasionally brushing against his. His heartbeat pounded against her palm where it rested on his chest. "You smell amazing," he murmured, his lips close to her ear. "What is that?" "Jasmine," she whispered back, her voice catching as his fingers splayed wider across her back, drawing her closer still. The room around them faded further into insignificance as they danced, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization. Emma found herself wondering what it would be like to be this close to him in other circumstances, without the crowd, without the music, without the artificial excuse of a dance. The thought should have shocked her. Instead, it sent a thrill of forbidden excitement through her veins. As the song drew to a close, Daniel didn't immediately release her. Their eyes met and held in the dim light, a silent conversation passing between them. His gaze dropped momentarily to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question forming that neither dared to voice. The spell was broken by one of Daniel's friends clapping him on the shoulder. "Hey man, some of us are heading to the loft. You coming?" Daniel reluctantly stepped back from Emma, though his hand lingered on her waist. "Actually," he said, never taking his eyes off her, "I think I should get Emma home." The friend looked between them, his eyebrows rising slightly as he recognized her. "Oh right, the stepsister." There was something knowing in his tone that made Emma's cheeks burn. "I can get an Uber," she offered weakly. "No." Daniel's response was immediate and firm. "I drove. I'll take you." In the quiet confines of his car, the tension that had been building all evening crystallized into something almost tangible. Emma was hyper-aware of Daniel's profile illuminated by passing streetlights. The strong line of his jaw, the curve of his lips, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly. "That dress really is something," he said after a long silence, his voice lower than usual. "Where'd you get it?" "Borrowed it from Jenna," she replied, conscious of how high it rode up her thighs as she sat. Daniel's eyes flickered briefly to her legs before returning resolutely to the road. Emma felt a strange power surge through her. She'd never considered herself a temptress, but something about Daniel's barely controlled reactions made her want to push further. She shifted in her seat, allowing the hem to ride up another inch. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Hot in here," she murmured, trailing her fingers along the edge of her neckline as if fanning herself. Daniel made a strangled sound in his throat and abruptly turned up the air conditioning. They rode in charged silence for several more minutes, the air between them crackling with unspoken tension. When Daniel finally pulled into their driveway and cut the engine, neither made a move to exit the car. "Emma," he began, his voice strained. She turned toward him, her hair falling over one bare shoulder. "Yes." He stared at her, conflict evident in his expression. "What are we doing?" The question hung between them, laden with implications. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "but I'm not sure I want to stop." Daniel inhaled sharply. "Our parents won't be back until Sunday night," she finished for him, her heart racing at her own boldness. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd noticed over the years. "This is crazy." "Probably," she agreed, reaching out to touch his arm. The contact sent electricity through her fingertips, and she felt him tense beneath her touch. Their eyes met in the darkness of the car, and something final shifted between them. Daniel leaned across the center console, his movement deliberate and unhurried, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. His lips met hers with gentle pressure that quickly deepened as Emma responded, her hand sliding up to his shoulder. The kiss was nothing like she had imagined, and she had imagined it, she realized with a jolt, far more often than she'd ever admitted to herself. His mouth was hot and demanding against hers, his tongue teasing the seam of her lips until she opened for him with a soft sigh. One of his hands came up to cradle her face, his thumb stroking along her cheekbone with surprising tenderness even as the kiss grew more heated. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "We should go inside," he whispered, his voice rough. The walk to the front door seemed endless, the night air cool against Emma's flushed skin. Daniel's hand rested at the small of her back, a possessive touch that made her pulse quicken. Inside the darkened house, they stood in the entryway, suddenly uncertain. "Coffee," Daniel offered, the mundane question at odds with the electricity still crackling between them. Emma nodded, following him to the kitchen. The familiar domestic space felt transformed, charged with new potential. She watched as Daniel moved with practiced efficiency, measuring beans, filling the water reservoir. The muscles in his back flexed beneath his thin t-shirt as he reached for mugs. "Daniel," she said softly. He turned, his eyes dark and questioning. "I don't actually want coffee." He set down the scoop with deliberate care. "What do you want, Emma?" The boldness that had possessed her in the car surged through her again. She closed the distance between them in 3 steps, tilting her face up to his. "You," with a groan that sounded like surrender, Daniel pulled her against him, his mouth finding hers with newfound urgency. This kiss held none of the tentative exploration of their first. It was all heat and hunger and pent-up desire. Emma's hands slid beneath his shirt, tracing the warm skin and hard muscle of his back as his own hands mapped the curves of her body through the thin dress. "We shouldn't," he murmured against her lips, even as his fingers found the zipper at the back of her dress. "Probably not," she agreed, working at the buttons of his shirt. "This changes everything," he warned, his lips trailing down her neck, making her gasp. "I'm counting on it," she whispered, tilting her head to give him better access. The chill of the kitchen counter pressed against her back as Daniel lifted her, setting her on the edge and stepping between her parted thighs. The position brought them flush against each other, and Emma couldn't suppress a moan at the contact. Daniel pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure about this?" In answer, Emma reached behind her neck and unclasped the hidden hook holding up her borrowed dress. The fabric slipped down to her waist, revealing a black lace bra that made Daniel's eyes darken further. "God, Emma," he breathed, his gaze traveling over her exposed skin with reverence. "You're beautiful." His hands, which had been gripping her waist, slid up to trace the delicate lace edging. The touch was feather-light but sent sparks shooting through Emma's body. She arched into his hands, silently begging for more. Daniel lowered his head, pressing his lips to the curve of her neck, the hollow of her throat, the swell of her breast above the lace. Each kiss was a brand marking her as his. Emma's fingers tangled in his hair, holding him to her as waves of sensation washed through her. "Not here," Daniel murmured against her skin. "Not like this." Before she could respond, he had lifted her, her legs wrapping around his waist instinctively as he carried her from the kitchen. They paused halfway up the stairs, Daniel pressing her against the wall as he claimed her mouth again in a kiss that left them both gasping. "Your room or mine?" he asked, his voice rough with desire. "Yours," Emma decided, not wanting to be surrounded by reminders of her everyday life for what was about to happen. Daniel's bedroom was cast in shadows, moonlight filtering through the partially open blinds to create patterns across the rumpled bedding. He set her down gently beside the bed, his hands framing her face as he kissed her with surprising tenderness. "We can stop," he offered, though the strain in his voice betrayed how difficult that would be. Emma reached for the hem of his shirt in response, pulling it up and over his head. Her hands explored the expanse of his chest, fascinated by the contrast of soft skin over hard muscle. "I don't want to stop." The remainder of their clothes fell away in a haze of kisses and caresses, each new revelation of skin met with wonder and hunger. When they finally tumbled onto the bed, completely bare to each other, Emma felt no shyness, only a burning need to be closer still. Daniel hovered above her, his eyes tracing every inch of her body with such intensity that Emma could almost feel it as a physical touch. "You're sure?" he asked one final time. "I've never been more sure of anything," she whispered, pulling him down to her. Their bodies joined with a shared gasp of pleasure and discovery. Emma arched beneath him, taking him deeper, their gazes locked in shared wonder at this forbidden connection. Daniel moved with careful restraint at first, until Emma's urging hands and breathless pleas drove him to a more primal rhythm. The room filled with the sounds of their passion. Soft moans, whispered names, the rustle of sheets beneath them. Emma lost herself in sensation, in the weight of Daniel above her, the feel of him inside her, the building pressure that promised release. When it came, it crashed over her like a tidal wave, Daniel's name falling from her lips in a broken cry. He followed moments later, burying his face in her neck as he shuddered against her. They lay entangled afterward, sweat cooling on their skin, hearts gradually slowing. Daniel's fingers traced idle patterns on her shoulder, his touch now soothing rather than inflaming. "What are we going to do?" he asked quietly. Emma turned to face him, her hand coming up to trace the line of his jaw. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I don't regret it." "Neither do I," he said, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Though I probably should." "We'll figure it out," she promised, though uncertainty lurked beneath her words. Daniel pulled her closer, tucking her head beneath his chin. One day at a time, they drifted to sleep still entwined, the boundaries that had defined their relationship irrevocably altered. Whatever came next, guilt, consequences, complications, would wait for morning. For now there was only this newfound connection, this shared secret, this forbidden touch that had finally bridged the careful distance between them. Dawn broke with gentle fingers of light stretching across the rumpled sheets. Emma stirred first, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The weight of an arm across her waist brought the previous night rushing back in vivid detail, and she turned carefully to study Daniel's sleeping face. In repose, he looked younger, the usual guardedness gone from his features. His dark lashes cast shadows on his cheeks, his lips slightly parted as he breathed deeply. Emma resisted the urge to trace the line of his jaw, not wanting to wake him yet. Instead, she catalogued the differences between how she'd seen him yesterday and how she saw him now. No longer just her irritatingly attractive stepbrother, but a man who had held her, kissed her, made love to her with unexpected tenderness. Her body still bore the pleasant ache of their passion, a tangible reminder that what had happened between them was real. Daniel's eyes fluttered open, finding hers immediately. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the weight of their actions hanging between them like an unasked question. "Hi," he said finally, his voice rough with sleep. "Hi," she replied, suddenly shy despite their intimacy. His thumb traced the curve of her hip beneath the sheets. "You're still here. Did you think I'd sneak back to my room? I wasn't sure." His eyes searched hers. "No regrets." Emma shook her head. "No regrets." Relief washed over his features and he pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "What now? Coffee," she decided. "And then we talk." In the kitchen, wearing his discarded t-shirt that fell to mid-thigh, Emma felt a strange sense of displacement. Everything was exactly as it had been yesterday, and yet nothing was the same. She measured coffee grounds with mechanical precision, trying to ground herself in the familiar routine. Daniel appeared in the doorway, wearing only low-hanging sweatpants, his chest bare. Emma's eyes traced the trail of dark hair that disappeared beneath his waistband, remembering how it felt beneath her fingers. "You look good in my shirt," he observed, his voice husky. Emma flushed, the casual compliment affecting her more than it should. "It's comfortable." He crossed to her, his movements purposeful. Without hesitation, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply. Emma melted into him, the coffee forgotten as her arms wound around his neck. When they parted, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I woke up." "You didn't hesitate," she noted, pleasantly surprised by his certainty. "I've done enough hesitating when it comes to you." His hands settled on her waist, thumb stroking the fabric of his shirt. "Last night changed things. I don't want to pretend it didn't." Emma searched his face, finding only sincerity in his expression. "What about our parents? The complications?" "We'll figure it out," he echoed her words from the night before. Together, the brewing coffee perfumed the air around them, a domestic counterpoint to the intensity of their exchange. Emma leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. Whatever came next, the awkward explanations, the potential fallout, the redefinition of their relationship, they would face it together. The line they had crossed couldn't be uncrossed, but standing here in the morning light, wrapped in Daniel's arms, Emma couldn't bring herself to wish it could. Some boundaries, once broken, revealed pathways to possibilities previously unimagined. Their forbidden touch had opened such a door, and despite the uncertainty of what lay beyond, Emma was certain of one thing. She wanted to walk through it with Daniel by her side.